We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that we really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side.
That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisades Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodrovics. Joining me today is a man that needs no introduction, Doug Casey. He's the founder of Casey Research, author of several books, including the bestseller on the New York on the New York Times bestseller list, Crisis Investing, and the author of the International Man blog. Doug also does what's called Doug Casey's Take on YouTube. How are you today, Doug?
Very good, Tom. It's nice to chat to you. I presume it's snowing in Calgary now.
Well, of course we did get a little bit, but again, the craziness of our weather here, it's supposed to be 8 degrees above zero later this afternoon. So,
well, I'm glad I'm not there.
Can't ever predict it. Doug, I wanted to start by getting your take on the difference between being an investor and a speculator.
Well, it's a distinction that many people are unaware of, especially today in the world of Robinhood and such. An investor is one that, to give you an analogy, plants a seed of corn and is willing to wait and nurture the investment, learn about it, know what's going on, in the anticipation that a plant will grow up and he'll get thousands of seeds in return. So investing is a productive venture. We combine capital from the investor and labor from the entrepreneur, and you create new wealth. I'm all for investing, but it's very, very hard to be an investor today more than any other time before because of the huge amount of distortions and misallocations of capital the government is cranking into the society. A speculator, however, is quite different. If we lived in a free market society, it would be very hard to be a speculator. A speculator is one who capitalizes on distortions created mostly by the government. So today is a speculator's delight. Classic speculations include buying gold before 1971, when it had been suppressed in price by the government for 40 years previously, or George Soros, for that matter, back in the 80s when he went short the British pound and broke the Bank of England. So it's things of that nature that a speculator does. And of course, being a speculator is often confused with being a trader, which is something that very few people can do successfully, buying and selling, and in many cases trying to second guess the market. Actually, most people in the stock market today are none of these things. They're gamblers. They're using the stock market as a substitute for online roulette or online poker.
Absolutely, Doug, and I think one of the points that really highlight the difference right now, and as you said, the abundance of cheap money that has come into the system is something that I know, in doing research for today's interview, you were saying that gold at $250 an ounce was cheaper in 2001 in real terms than at $35 an ounce in 1971 because the dollar had lost so much value, correct?
That's exactly correct. That's a surprising statement to most people, but it's true. And I pointed that out in the newsletter that I was writing at the time. And at the same time, silver was even cheaper. It got down to about $4.50 an ounce back then. So, yeah, sometimes these things happen. I'm very bullish now on gold at 1,800, 1,900. I think it's going to go much higher because the crisis we're facing right now is much greater than anything we've had in the past. This is going to blow the socks off of most people, in my opinion. It's really, really serious.
Absolutely, Doug, and you write and you speak a lot about that, but I'd like to get kind of your take on how the failing U.S. dollar will be much more consequential for the world as a whole, and bring down much much greater or much more currencies and systems in the world versus, let's say, something like the currency in Venezuela being absolutely worthless at this point.
Right. Well, of course, the dollar is the world's currency at this point. Most of the trade in the world, even trade between Russia and China, people that are adversaries of the US, mostly uses US dollars. The central banks of the world, almost all of them, the majority of their assets are dollars. It's the official currency of 3 or 4 other countries in the world, Panama, Liberia, several others, and the unofficial currency of many others who find it inconvenient to use their basically worthless controlled domestic currencies. So it's a very big deal. If the dollar collapses, it's going to have profound international consequences. It's not like the Argentine peso collapsing, which basically just affects Argentines, or the Venezuelan bolivar collapsing just affects Venezuelans. This is a very big deal. And the dollar is on its way to being destroyed. They're creating trillions of them as we speak.
So, Doug, once gold kind of starts to pick up that slack and goes into a mania phase, what do you think some of the points, the indications that are going to point to a time to start looking at other assets to get into?
Well, there aren't a lot of assets today that are cheap, that are good bargains. The stock market in general is in a bubble, very overpriced by all historical norms. The bond market is in a hyper bubble with interest rates crowding zero. About the only thing that's cheap out there today, and I like to buy things that are cheap. They reduce your downside, they increase your upside. Look, I don't like to chase things that have already run. Commodities are cheap today. And I think they're again going to have their day in the sun. So that's the way I'm playing it right now. Looking to be long commodities and staying away from stocks and treating bonds generally like poison. Although there are convertible bonds on some gold mining companies that I'm long, but that's kind of a niche investment that hard to get into for most people.
But looking forward, and obviously you've made lots of predictions in the past, and looking forward, do you think that there are certain characteristics of this bull market that could start marking a time to possibly exit some of these gold positions?
Yeah, sure. I'm planning on exiting all my gold positions. What I see on Slime or Newspeak magazines, if they still exist in a few years, when I see them running a picture of a golden bear tearing apart the New York Stock Exchange, that's going to be the bell ringing at the top of the gold market, at which time I'm anxious to sell all of my gold stocks, which are essentially burning matches, frankly. It's a terrible industry. It's a terrible business as a business. And buy Berkshire Hathaway and forget about it. But that's years in the future, at least a couple of years in the future.
Absolutely. So, Doug, could this be the final gold bull market? I know you've spoken a little bit about that, and is part of the consideration, for this being considered the final bull market, how messy one looks at the mining industry as?
Yeah, that's a good point. Look, I'm of the opinion that gold is once again going to be used as day-to-day money. There are a lot of reasons why gold has been used as money for thousands of years. of the 92 naturally occurring elements, it's got some unique properties. It's not going to be displaced by the government's paper money, or for that matter, by the government's digital money. I mean, that's just the way I'm playing it. It's a great speculation today, and yeah, once again, when the world loses confidence in the dollar and therefore other currencies, what are we going to use as money? Well, they can coerce the citizens into using some new phony money that they create, but I believe that the market overwhelms the government fiats. So yeah, I'm planning on remaining bullish. And look, I bought my first gold coin in 1971. I still have the damn thing. And I bought a lot more since then. And like I said, I'm not planning on selling them until that bell's ringing at the top of the market. It's going to be some time from now at a much higher level.
So, Doug, when you speak about the 9 Ps when it comes to investing in mining stocks, can we talk a little bit about those and about how undervalued these gold stocks are at the moment? And are we looking at companies in this space that would be part of the new Nifty 50, as you've called it, that'll be stocks to own for the next 10 years?
No, I don't think. Look, gold mining is a terrible business. You've got to spend generally millions of dollars to find a deposit. It's like going on a very expensive Easter egg hunt with no guarantee of a return. Then your trouble really starts when you find it, because then you got to spend tens of millions or more drilling and proving the deposit, maybe sometimes much more than that. And then you've got to start developing it, which means permits and regulations and dealing with native groups. It takes a decade to put a deposit into production, assuming it's even economic, and the chances are 1 out of 1,000 that it's going to be economic. And then after you put it into production, or as you put it into production, it'll cost you scores of millions, maybe hundreds of millions, maybe billions to put it into production. It's a horrible business, and everybody hates you because they say you're raping the land and so forth. So, look, I'm a huge fan of gold philosophically, and right now I'm a huge bull on gold financially. But the business is gold mining stocks are basically burning matches. Because they've always got to replace the reserves. They're always looking for something more, and they don't control the price of the product. Not worried about the price of gold, but this is why Warren Buffett, up until very recently, has never bought a gold mining stock, or I don't think any mining stock. It's not a growth industry. It's an industry for speculators, not investors, really.
So, Doug, as you were mentioning how cheap silver was earlier, and we've seen it hit all-time, let's say, highs on the gold to silver ratio. How do you think it will perform relative to gold in this coming run?
The silver market is much smaller than the gold market, and it's therefore much more volatile. And people that are fans of silver tend to treat it like a religion, so that when it goes for a real run, they get super enthusiastic, much more than gold. So this next time around, silver has hit about $50 an ounce twice in the past. This time on this run, I think it's going to be, because of all the money, or I should say all the currency units, it's different from money, being created. I think we're going to see $100, probably $200 silver.
So, Doug, when we talk about these assets to hold and, let's say, try and capture some of the purchasing power that our currency has right now, do you think that Bitcoin has a place alongside gold and silver? Yes,
I do. There are a lot of advantages to Bitcoin. the 5 characteristics of a good money that Aristotle defined in the 4th century BC are all true of Bitcoin. It's durable, it's divisible, it's convenient, consistent. I puzzled about whether it had value in itself. That's why I was a late adopter to Bitcoin. But its value is as a transfer mechanism. 75% of the world's people lived in blocked currency countries where the kwachas and pulas and pesos and dirhams, crap currency that they have to use inside their country, are worth 0 outside their country. So you're going to find lots of people all around the world increasingly going to Bitcoin to get out of their native currencies. And everybody is going to want to get out of the dollar. And there's a lot of good arguments for Bitcoin that I've just named. So I am a Bitcoin bull, yes.
So if obviously these countries, when their currencies start to collapse, they're going to be threatened by Bitcoin and let's say cryptocurrencies in general. Do you think that them making transactions in Bitcoin or let's say outside cryptocurrencies that aren't under their control, do you think that making them illegal is going to hamper them in any way?
Yeah, it'll hamper it to some degree. It'll make it more inconvenient. But no, I don't think it will, quite frankly. In fact, when you make something illegal, people want it more. Look, most of the world's governments are actually bankrupt. And when an entity, a big, powerful entity, is bankrupt, they get very dangerous. They become desperate. They'll do almost anything. So in a fear environment, which I think is coming up, there's going to be a bigger demand for things like Bitcoin and like gold.
So, Doug, in preparation for today, I asked our audience for a couple questions, and we had a lot of people that would like your thoughts on uranium. So, do you think that we could see another bull run like the last one we saw in uranium prices?
Yeah, I do. The situation is setting up in very much the same way that it was back in 2000. There's the usage of uranium is considerably greater than new production. Inventories are coming down. China and India and other places in the third world are building new reactors. Why? Because they can see that it is the safest, the cleanest, and the cheapest form of mass power generation available today. So yeah, I'm a uranium bull. Now, this is an interesting technological argument. I mean, we can talk about new reactor technologies, generation 4 and 5 for reactors that they're only being held back by political hysteria. We can talk about the possibilities for thorium. There's all kinds of things that have to do with radioactive fuels, but I remain quite bullish on uranium at these prices. So, and uranium stocks, look, during the last run in uranium stocks in the aughts, it started out there were about 5 or 6 uranium companies in the world. By the time the bubble crusted, there were about 400 companies that had uranium in their name. And now most of them have dried up and blown away. Same thing is going to happen again. So yeah, I'm a bull on uranium.
Excellent. So being a technophile, Doug, you must be thinking about some of the raw products that will help build the future. So do you put any time and consideration into other commodities like copper or helium?
Yeah, very much actually. As I said, commodities in general are very cheap today. You can build arguments pro and con for most of these commodities. And of course, this is what being a bull or a bear is all about. This is why commodities prices fluctuate. Any other commodity that I'm really wild about today? I think grains are very cheap at this point. Soybeans are going to go for a big run, but this is agricultural. This is a different kind of game, and it is not a good way that you can invest in them or speculate in them, I should say, through the stock market. You basically got to use the futures market for other commodities, except for copper, of course. There are a lot of copper mining companies. At $2, it was a giveaway. Where it is right now, about $3, well, I don't know. I'm kind of agnostic about copper. And then nickel and cobalt and lithium and vanadium. There's all these things. It's hard to keep track of all their prices and their fundamentals. Why? Is there something that you're thinking about in particular?
Well, one of our listeners was asking about helium. And we know that, obviously helium is being used to cool the next generation of supercomputers. So it's going to be obviously become more important, and there's becoming less and less of it as most commodities will kind of follow that same path, right?
Yeah, well, most people are probably unaware that after hydrogen and stupidity, which are the two most common things in the universe, helium is the third most common thing in the universe. There's just a relative shortage of it here on Earth. And eventually, all the elements will be able to be transmuted. You can transmute the elements today. It's just uneconomic. It's just expensive. Yeah, you're absolutely right, but I don't know how you invest in helium. It's a real oddball element. I mean, if there was a company that had giant helium reserves, and you could be sure if there was a panic that the government wouldn't confiscate them or price control them or something like that, yeah, I think it would be a great speculation. But I don't know of one. Do you?
I don't either, Doug. And it's an interesting market to maybe look into.
Yeah, it is actually. If somebody does, I'd like to hear about it.
So, Doug, I'd like to turn a little bit to let's say inflation versus deflation, and I believe your thoughts on the coming, let's say, what could happen in inflation versus deflation. You don't think it really matters, and you think that really the outcome of that is going to be chaos. So does the real chaos start when the next president is actually announced? And do you still think that Harris and Biden will win?
Well, several months ago, I wrote an article for International Man that detailed the 6 reasons that I expected Biden to win. And actually, it's the Harris Regency, because poor old Joe was just sad and tired. He's like a walking sock puppet or something like that. So we're going to have a real nightmare if we get Harris, which I guess we will, unless Trump pulls a rabbit out of the hat here in the next month or so. I mean, she's going to be America's answer to Evita Peron in Argentina. She's going to be a nightmare. Okay, well, in these 6 reasons that I gave why I thought Biden was going to win, and I say that as somebody that picked Trump to win in 2016 and made a money bet on it too. Look, the reasons that Biden was elected, there are a lot of fundamentals that are pushing the whole world towards statists and collectivists like that. Among them, the education system, where kids are actually brainwashed by Marxist professors wholesale, and many other things that we don't want to talk about now. What's going to be the upshot of this? You've got at least 70 million people that voted for Trump, who's got his own set of problems. the good thing about Trump is he's a cultural conservative. A whole different discussion we could go into, but we don't have time for. Anyway, these people actually feel defrauded, and chances are very good that they were defrauded. And when this new regime starts making lots of laws, the most important of which would be illegalizing or taxing or tightly controlling all kinds of things with weapons, with guns, I think the cat could get out of the bag, and we could be looking at a civil war. Hopefully, it'll just be a war of secession where the blue counties and the red counties part company. Because when you have people that hate each other and have radically different views on the way the world works, it's idiocy and a guaranteed disaster to put them in the same political entity together, especially when that entity is so overwhelmingly powerful and sticks its nose into everything, like the US government. So, yeah, I think a civil war or actual secession, which would be the actual answer, is increasingly likely. But it's not going to be good, because this is all going to take place in the context of what I call the Greater Depression, an economic disaster, economic chaos, which, and who knows what the catalyst might be to really set this thing off. This COVID hysteria itself is bad enough. I mean, this is, you can look forward to the next 10 years being very interesting in the Chinese interpretation of that word. It's wise to have a crib outside your native country in times like these. It's going to look like the 1930s and 40s, except worse, I'm afraid.
So, Doug, as you talk about this next decade becoming very chaotic and very taxing to the average person, let's say the average blue collar worker, what are some of the steps that you think could help, like I say, the average person, maybe somebody that can't necessarily have a crib or a holdout in another country? What are some steps that they can take to make themselves, more sovereign?
Yeah, well, look. The answer to the question is you got to produce more than you consume and save the difference. And when you save, don't save in dollars, save in precious metals and learn something about the markets, because it's going to be one of those times when wheeling and dealing is going to be more survival oriented, let's say, than just working and producing. So it's going to be a bizarro world where things are upside down. So my answer to the question is, you've got to save. You got to cut back now before the economy makes you cut back. Cut back while it's still more or less in your control, and put what you save in the smartest place you can think of. And I gotta say that's still the precious metals.
Perfect.
Although as a speculator, I far prefer the mining stocks today. As crappy a business as it is, these things are going to howl in the next few years for all kinds of reasons.
So, Doug, as we're speaking about politics and let's say the tensions that can develop around a figurehead like a president, your new book, Assassin, talks about exactly that. And as you say, it's not about anyone in particular, but rather the considerations around, let's say, a political assassination. So tell us more about that and about the series in general.
Yeah, well, I have decided that the way to write things is not so much in the form of nonfiction anymore, but fiction. There's a whole different group of people that read fiction than nonfiction, number one. And number two, there are certain things that are better talked about in the form of a story, in the form of fiction, than in the form of nonfiction, like this book, which I happen to have a copy of conveniently, Assassin. It's on Amazon, of course, and doing pretty well there. It's the third book in a series where our hero, Charles Knight, he starts out at age 23, gets involved in a mining stock, makes a lot of money, which can happen in mining stocks, turns $10,000 into a million, and he decides to go to Africa to check it out. Finds it's a fraud, gets involved in a bush war, and has all kinds of weird adventures in the jungle. Second book is Drug Lord, where he gets involved in drugs that are both FDA regulated and DEA regulated, makes another fortune, which the government also steals from him, and puts him in jail for 2 years, which is where this book, Assassin, starts. Starts with his adventures in a federal pen, and then the fact that talks about, we go into political assassination. I mean, everything from Caesar to Lincoln, was it a good thing or a bad thing that these guys got killed? And a lot of other historical figures, Kennedy and so forth. What's the real story behind these things? And Charles, who's kind of pissed off at this point, actually becomes an assassin, but a very ethical one. This series of books is really a study in ethics. It's about what's right and wrong, what's good and evil, and what works and doesn't work. So if I do say so myself, Assassin is a hell of a read. It's really a good read. I'm reading it myself just for my own pleasure, having written it and edited it. Now I'm just reading for enjoyment, and it's really good. And it's got lots of data and facts in it, just as Speculator does, which is of more direct interest to people that are into mining stocks. There's a lot of interesting stuff about geology and mining and the mining markets and other stuff in Speculator. So I suggest people go, and of course, Drug Lord is about that thing, but I think your listeners should buy Assassin and Speculator first.
Excellent, Doug. How many more books are going to be in the series, and how many more jobs are going to be the character is going to do?
Well, we are going to reform the unjustly besmirched reputation of at least 3 more occupations, and it becomes increasingly radical. The 7th book is called Apocalypse, and that's going to be wild and woolly, I promise you. So don't fall behind in reading these books. They're actually quite good and entertaining, and also educational.
I know you like the exercise as an intellectual stimulation, Doug, and you've written quite a few books over the years. I wanted to ask you which book you were most proud of, and do you think taught you the most? We know that translating thoughts into words is always harder. So which one are you most proud of and taught you the most, do you think?
Well, my first book was The International Man, subtitle, Making the Most of Your Personal Freedom and Financial Opportunity Around the World. That book became the largest selling book in the history of Rhodesia. And a lot of your listeners may not even know what Rhodesia is. It subsequently became Zimbabwe. Interesting story behind that book. So that led me to a lot of interesting adventures in Central Africa. And crisis investing, of course, was number 1 on the New York Times list for, I think, 29 weeks. And that was good. Crisis investing for the rest of the 90s is a much more sophisticated book. But for that reason, it didn't sell nearly as much as the original, which was simpler and shorter. If you go on Amazon, you'll find 7 or 8 books, 9, I don't know, that I've written. And I actually am proud of all of them because I try to, I don't just dash things out. I'm a believer in quality. So short commercial on all the books, but there we have it.
Perfect, Doug. One of the other outlets we can find you is Doug Casey's Take on YouTube. So tell us a bit more about that and how you share your thoughts there.
Well, every not quite every day, but about 4 times a week, Matt Smith and I, very interesting character, Matt, have a conversation about some subject. And it's all over the board. I mean, what's happening in politics, an economic issue, a moral issue, practical issue, all kinds of things, everything under the sun. And we're basically doing that as a good karma thing. I don't need the money. And the thing isn't monetized. If it is, I'm sure that eventually Google would demonetize it. So we just do it because we think it needs doing. People seem to like it. So we do that. And of course, the International Man blog, I write an article every week, as well as do a number of other authors. And it's a hell of a good blog.
Excellent, Doug. Anywhere else, any of our listeners, or you would like to point them to find any more of your work or anything?
You go to caseyresearch.com. I sold that company several years ago, but I still occasionally do an interview for them. And there's a huge body of interviews that I've done for them on pretty radical subjects. That was when I owned the company, before it became a marketing organization. So you can go there and root around. If you sign up, they will inundate you with spam. But that's not my fault.
Perfect, Doug. Well, I really appreciate your time and your thoughts today, Doug. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Tom.
This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.